You are now joining Children of the Watch.
That's right. It's the #1 podcast in the galaxy for all things Star Wars television, including The Mandalorian. I am your host, Alex Maxwell, and joining me, as always, is
Mac Lacey. Alex, it's a fantastic, wonderful occasion that brings us together on this podcast today. Mandalorian Season 3
Let's
is here.
go! We have finally arrived back to Mando season, and if you know anything about this podcast, we are Mandalorian obsessed. And so this is so exciting, Mac. Like I couldn't sleep last night knowing that the Season 3 premiere was today.
I know. I mean, we've been talking about this day for a long time now. We've done a very in-depth kind of hype building campaign, on the feed. But today is the day. It's here. We can talk in concrete detail about the events of Chapter 17.
Yeah, and I can't wait to do it. And if you're new to the podcast, maybe you just found us, we do scene-by-scene breakdowns, not just to recap the episode, but also to kind of act like gold miners looking for any Easter eggs, anything that's super important that maybe others might overlook. And we're not going to overlook anything. We're literally going to talk about all of it in our scene-by-scene breakdown. But we also want to hear from you guys, our listeners, because we know that you guys have fantastic thoughts and theories. So you can call into our voicemail hotline, which is 205-259-6675. And make sure you leave your name, where you're from, and keep it under 3 minutes. And you might make it on to the show, which we'll do a voicemail hotline episode later in the week, and you could be on it.
Yeah, those are tons of fun. We love hearing from y'all. We just get to, geek out and be excited about The Mandalorian together. So make sure you call in with your theories, speculation, comments, questions, anything. We want to hear from you.
So, Mac, before we get into the breakdown, let's just talk our general thoughts and feelings. Of course, we're going to be talking about spoilers the entire episode.
Yeah. So if you have not watched the episode yet, turn back now. This is your last warning.
Yeah. So what were your thoughts? What were your feelings about the Season 3 premiere, Chapter 17, The Apostate?
So I just had a wonderful morning watching some Star Wars today. I really, really enjoyed the episode. It's, we're in Season 3 of the show, so we don't necessarily need a huge, big, bombastic blowout episode to begin and end every season. I thought this one was a little bit more understated, but it took care of a lot of the legwork the show needed to do just to get everybody caught up, one, from the events of Book of Boba Fett, and kind of get everybody on the same page. And then two, to set up what the season was going to be. And in those functions, I thought the episode performed amazingly.
Absolutely. And I don't think I could have said that any better myself. I feel the exact same way. And it was just like a wonderful celebration of what we love about Star Wars too, right? Like, that's what made this so exciting. The Mandalorian was coming back. Like, again, love Andor. I don't think anybody can argue with the quality of Andor. But that's like a section of Star Wars where this is like got everything that you love about Star Wars in one thing. And it just felt like a celebration, a return, if you will.
For sure. I love that we've got so much variety in tone and subject matter and everything in Star Wars now. Yeah. But this definitely did feel kind of like a getting back to the core of like what made us fall in love with the franchise in the first place. The Mandalorian is just fun. That's the best way to put it, I think. It's just so much fun.
Well, I think it like captures the feels of Star Wars that I had when I was a kid watching it for the first time. And I think that's, why I connect to The Mandalorian so much is like that same feeling I got whenever I saw the original trilogy. And then later when the prequels came out and I went to see those in theaters, I get that same feeling when I watch The Mandalorian, and it just feels so special. And this episode was incredible. There was a lot of Mandalorian lore that we got to talk about. And if you're into the lore stuff, we did actually two-parter of Mandalorian History 201 where we break down literally the entire timeline of Mandalorian history. So go back and find that in our feed because that was a lot of fun. to talk about. And there's going to be some things that I think we've got to add to our lexicon from this episode.
Yeah, I mean, our videos are pretty much already outdated.
Exactly.
Video and podcasts.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll have to probably just keep updating our Mandalorian history course.
And another thing that I love before we jump into the breakdown was just how much Emily Swallow and her portrayal of the armor was so present in the beginning episode of this season.
Yes, to me, and it makes sense to kind of center the kicking off point, the premise of the episode around the armorer, because she has been kind of the, like a character that the spiritual conflicts and concerns of the show kind of center around. She's both like challenging our characters in like, to be better, to grow and stuff, and also giving them challenges as far as like, she made Din an outcast and everything. So I think starting with her, I love it because I love the armor. Just such a fun character to get to watch. I thought Emily did a fantastic job in her performance. Very physical performance. There were a lot of physical things to her acting that I noticed in this episode that I really enjoyed. But yeah, it makes sense to kind of start with the armor.
Yeah, and it's really cool after we had just talked to her on the podcast, which you can find an interview with Emily Swallow over on our feed. Before the season began, some things are now starting to click in place with what she was talking about on the podcast. So I'm excited to dive deeper into that. So before we jump into our official breakdown, is there any last thoughts that you have, or are you just ready to do this?
I mean, let's just get into the meat of it.
Chapter 17, The Apostate. The writer is, of course, Jon Favreau. He's pretty much written every episode of The Mandalorian.
That'll be a recurring theme.
If it's not him, it's Dave Filoni. But the director is Rick Famuyiwa, and we already know him from The Mandalorian. He did the second chapter in season 1. He also did chapter 6 in season 1, and then he did that fantastic episode in season 2 called The Believer with Bill Burr.
Oh yeah. It's still maybe my favorite episode of The Mandalorian.
Yeah, and so, but anytime, so he's actually directing episodes 7 and 8 of this season as well, so like he's doing even more.
Yeah, that points to this season kind of seems like Rick's as far as the directing is concerned.
It really does. And here's the thing though, is like anytime Rick is involved, there's going to be a lot of action.
Yeah.
Right. He does action really, really well. Like his buildup of action is, I think, some of the best that we've seen. And you see that present in this episode. This is a very heavy action-packed episode. So it's nice to have Rick back.
Yeah, for sure. He's always welcome on The Mandalorian.
So let's do this. Before we begin the episode, we are treated to a shorter than expected recap highlighting IG-11 and Din's admission to the armorer in the Book of Boba Fett. And by the way, if you haven't watched chapters 5 through 6 of the Book of Boba Fett, I think it's essential to understanding why Grogu is back with Din.
Yeah, it should be clear to you if you haven't seen it that you're missing a little bit of something after the way that season 2 ends. So make sure you go back and pick up the story that's found in those episodes.
We also did breakdowns of those. You can find that on our feed. But the show seems to have expected you to have watched, and I think most probably did. Mm-hmm. And if you didn't, you still got time to go back and watch it.
Yeah.
So out of the recap, we actually begin to hear some clanking noises as the Lucasfilm logo and helmet openings begin. And then as it continues, we realize it's actually a hammering sound. And we open to see a gloved hand pouring out a liquid into a Cairo furnace. That's what the audio said it was. And we see the reflection of the armorer in the water. We also see the Mythosaur skull hanging against a cave wall. And then we see the armorer inspecting her own work and then begin shaping what appears to be a Mandalorian helmet. And at first, I thought this was Din's helmet she was making.
I thought that this was going to be a flashback. Originally, his helmet was painted. It got kind of polished and shined up, later at some point.
Yeah.
And it, that thought continues in this scene for a good long time.
Do you think that was on purpose? Like for you to make it feel like, is this a flashback? Is this Din? What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a great way to just get you immediately invested and kind of thinking about the show. When you're trying to figure it out. It draws you in. It's a great way to kick everything off. But it's also, I think, it helps you when you think it could be like, oh, this is like a younger version of our main character or whatever. I think you're more invested in watching those events, and you're maybe paying a little bit closer attention than if you think it's just like some foundling.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and one of my favorite television shows of all time, Lost, used to have openings just like this, where you're like, you don't really know when it's taking place until something happens to kind of orient yourself of, oh, that's where we're at. This is what's happening. I got it now. And it waits a while for you to like catch on. And I just kind of love those openings. And this is pretty much that same thing. And so I thought it was really cool to see the armor do her thing. And remember, to the Mandalorians, their armor is everything. So essentially, the armor is like their priest, their spiritual leader. And you got to imagine that the Children of the Watch, like this thing, like when she's creating the helmet, especially for them, this is a very sacred event.
It's like a sacrament, something like that. I mean, this would be a pivotal formational moment in someone's life, like the bestowing of your armor and everything. I mean, it's just like so many real world kind of religious like coming of age things. I love that we're getting that kind of fleshed out, and so now that when we're talking about Mandalorian lore and history and stuff, we've got this in the back of our minds. Like. And this is probably just something that's particular to Children of the Watch.
It might be something that the ancient Mandalorians used to do.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say, is just like anything that is a Children of the Watch thing, there's always potential for it to be an ancient thing that all Mandalorians did,
Right. And again, you've said this so many times on this podcast, but we've got the Jedi fleshed out. We've got the Sith fleshed out, largely in like other materials, but not really on screen. The Acolyte, I'm hoping that you do some of that work for us. But it's really cool to now get a third party of like that, building the lore around someone else in the Star Wars galaxy, and just to see stuff like this, it's just really special and fun.
Yeah, for sure. I almost feel like it's a little bit like if anyone's played the Elder Scrolls games, you've got all the different factions that have their own like quest lines and everything like that. I feel like this is kind of our third faction in our run through of the Star Wars galaxy, if that makes sense.
It's pretty much...
And I would love for more things to pop up like that. Like I would love like learning about even things like the Rebellion, learning about their like. If they have any like ceremonies or rituals,
the witches of Dathomir.
Yeah. Oh yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of different groups that I'd love to have more detailed history and cultural understanding of.
Absolutely. So after painting the helmet in an aqua blue, she turns holding it, and we get a better look at the smaller helmet that is meant for a child's head. Drummers pound a beat as she brings it out of the mouth of the cave, and behind her, other Mandalorians form a procession and carry their flags in formation. Outside, other Mandalorians beat their chest armor as the armor approaches the water, and in the water stands a solitary boy waiting, and we actually learn from the credits that this boy's name is Ragnar, which is a great Mandalorian name.
For sure. I mean, there's all kinds of parallels to like Viking, historical Vikings that the Mandalorians have. So Ragnar fits right in there to me.
And he's portrayed by Wesley Kimmel, who played the Tusken Kid in the Book of Boba Fett. So this is that same actor. And again, like Ragnar, they gave him a name. That's one of the things that you were hoping for in our predictions. Yep. So we get another Mandalorian named. And what's cool is like he's young. And by the time of the sequel trilogy, he would be a young adult.
Right.
And they're thinking about doing movies taking place after episode 9. So maybe Ragnar shows up later. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, it's the coolest thing about a franchise like Star Wars is just like anytime a character has a name, I feel like, or even sometimes if they don't have a name, it's a potential new story that can be told somewhere along the line. And so, the more like little side and background characters we get a little bit of information on, the better, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, so in the lineup of Mandalorians, we actually see Paz Vizsla, and the armorer stops in front of the boy and raises the helmet into the air. And when she lowers it back down, she begins what I assume is part of the creed, and he repeats it back to her. And she says, "I swear on my name and the names of the ancestors that I shall walk the way of Mandalore." By the way, that was the correct spelling in the closed captions, so good job to them.
Boom.
"And the words of the creed shall be forever forged in my heart." And here's the thing that I noticed, especially on my second watch of this. Paz seems to watch on in admiration, and that makes me question if this boy is either a Vizsla or a foundling maybe Paz brought in personally.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Ragnar Vizsla has a nice ring to it.
It does, and it sounds. I mean, I imagine at this point, just because of the naming convention that's already in place, all Vizslas have a 3-letter name that starts with P. Because we've got Pre-Vizsla, Paz Vizsla. I guess Tar Vizsla kind of ruins that that streak, but yeah, I don't know. It could be.
So for our new listeners, can you explain the Vizslas very, very quickly? You just said Pre and Tar. We know who Paz is, but who are those other two?
Yeah, so and this is something we love to do on this podcast, by the way, is just our philosophy is that our podcast is for diehard fans that have been Star Wars nerds their entire life, and for people just now, kind of this is maybe the Mandalorian's their first touch point into the franchise. Yeah. So we love making those connections for folks, and even if you've been hearing this for years and years and years, it's cool to get a little refresher,
Right.
But anyway, Tar Vizsla is maybe one of the most important figures in all of Mandalorian history.
Yes.
Basically the only person to, before debatably Grogu, the first person to kind of walk both paths of a Mandalorian and a Jedi.
Right.
So the Darksaber, which we know from, the show, he's the originator of the Darksaber. It's his lightsaber. And then Pre-Vizsla is his descendant, who in the Clone Wars animated series, you can see causing all kinds of trouble. But he's the leader of Death Watch, basically kind of a fringe organization, kind of trying to bring some traditional elements back into Mandalorian culture and stuff, which means I think there's probably more than likely a connection between them and Children of the Watch.
Yeah, so. We're about to talk about that in just a second. And then Paz is probably either I don't want to say it's Pre's son, because I don't think that lines up, but maybe like a nephew, some sort of relation there, cousin.
Yeah.
To that, but he's also a Vizsla, so that means his ancestor was Tar Vizsla.
Indeed.
So I just thought it was really interesting that Paz was watching this. There just seemed to be more of a focus on Paz watching this, and he seemed interested. I know it's kind of hard to get emotions out of a mask, but that's kind of the vibes I was getting.
I think this show did an excellent job of getting emotions out of a mask. There's so many different shots in here that we'll get to later that I'm like, I knew what facial expression someone was making underneath their helmet, which that's consistently been a cool thing about the show, is to see how just through like body movement and shot selection and stuff they can put you in a character's headspace that you don't get to see their face,
Right. So maybe Paz is just like us and he really enjoys all things Mandalorian, but I don't know. That's something to keep in the back of our mind, that there might be a connection there.
I also think Paz is probably the armorer's biggest devotee.
Oh,
like he kind of seems like her
right-hand
personal man. like the armorer's hand sort of.
Yeah.
So I think it could just be that he's like watching the armorer too.
True. Interesting. Ooh, okay. Let's keep going. So the armorer places the helmet on Ragnar, and they repeat, "This is the way," back and forth. The whole covert repeats it behind them, and another young Mandalorian gives the armorer a shallow bowl, and she dips it in the water. And as she's holding the bowl, she says that from this moment on, I shall never remove my helmet. And then the boy is supposed to repeat it. But as he is, the armor senses something and stops him. Paz also senses the danger from behind. And then the armor yanks the boy to the shore as a giant crocodile turtle kaiju, croc
turtle. Yeah.
burst from the water, and the Ragnar barely misses the jaws, and the Mandalorians begin attacking the creature.
Just immediately. There was not a single one of them that the thought run came into their minds. Right. They just all immediately start shooting tiny little blasters at this behemoth.
Yep.
And I think that says a lot about kind of just the Mandalorian philosophy.
Yep. And so they allowed the kids to get away to safety as they try and distract it. And many Mandalorians are eaten. R.I.P. You will never be forgotten to the children of the Watch. Shout out to you. Paz also orders the warriors to the sky, and then a blue-plated Mandalorian and 2 others land on the creature's back, slapping charges on the back of it, and they rocket off as it explodes behind them. But then on the pauldron of that blue Mandalorian with the white stripes, there's a Death Watch symbol.
Mm-hmm.
And then later we get confirmation probably about the connection of Death Watch to Children of the Watch. But it seems more and more likely that Children of the Watch is the continuation of Death Watch.
Yeah. And if you want more information on Death Watch, we probably don't have time to get too far into it right now. But I mean, we've already kind of given you an overview through Pre's history. But we've got all kinds of episodes. We covered every Mandalorian-centric episode of the Clone Wars before season 1 of The Mandalorian even came out. So scroll all the way down to the bottom of our podcast feed, and you should find those if you're interested.
And I'm not sure how important it is to like. They're the same thing at this point, so it doesn't really matter.
Kind of, Yeah.
So, what I love about this scene is you get to see how much the Mandalorians care for one another in battle. It's not like every man for themselves. We're just here to fight. They actually go out of their way to rescue each other.
Yeah, like no one. Historically thinking, I would have thought that Mandalorians potentially would sacrifice a brother in arms for a killing blow. If that makes sense, like they're going to pursue victory at whatever cost. Like when you sign up to be a Mandalorian, you're signing up to die in battle eventually. So, nobody cares, right?
Right.
But this is kind of a different side. I mean, they're very, like, immediately they were protective of the children, the foundlings. And then, they're looking out for each other in battle. Like Paz is pushing people out of harm's way and all kinds of stuff. So it was interesting to see that.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. And then, of course, they're trying all these different things to try to bring this creature down. They're shooting their grappling hooks into it, and then it rolls. They're getting tossed around like rag dolls. The armor rushes in to rescue a Mandalorian who's drowning, walking him back to shore. And the boy, Ragnar, runs to save the armorer after she's knocked down. And the creature is now coming for Ragnar, and then Paz swoops in to knock him out of the way. And just as the jaws are getting closer to consuming Paz, it's suddenly rocked by a huge blast as we see Din's N1 starfighter swooping in to save the day. And on first watch, again, I thought for sure that this was a flashback until this moment.
Me too. So, like, I thought at first the kid could have been Din. Like, we could have been watching Din's, like, foundling ceremony or whatever it was. And then we started... There was a Mandalorian who was wearing a very similar pauldron to what Din was wearing in like, season 1 before his new armor. And
I
then
saw that.
The paint of his armor looked like a fresh, bright version of what Din was wearing in season 1. So I initially thought, I was like, okay, Din's a kid. Oh, wait, no. This is still in the past, but Din's an adult.
Like
this
a younger adult, Yeah.
And then the N1. So it really kind of kept me on my toes.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. But I mean, I guess you're supposed to imagine Din went through this process at some point. Like this happened to him when he first put on his helmet.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So Din fires a proton torpedo when he swoops back around into the creature's stomach, killing it, and then he lands. The canopy opens, and the children of the Watch see Din, and then little Grogu pops up in the canopy behind him. And then we cut to title credits, Chapter 17, The Apostate. And I've got a definition for you. If you don't know what apostate means, this is the official definition. It's a person who renounces a religious or political belief.
Yeah, basically someone who held an ideology and does not hold to that ideology anymore.
This definition could also apply to somebody besides Din in this episode.
Interesting.
it could also apply to bo-katan.
Yeah. I mean, like, as far as, like... Yeah, so we've always been kind of talking about things in terms of, like, there's the Children of the Watch, that,
Right.
like, that, that vein of Mandalorianism, we'll say.
Right.
And then there's mainstream Mandalore, which is
Yeah.
Bo-Katan's thing. But you're right, she's given up on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. The title kind of goes both ways, and I like it. I did have the thought that this chapter would be titled that because they mentioned that he's an apostate in chapter 5 of the Book of Boba Fett.
Yeah.
So it seems like an apt title. Now, there was a bit of a small controversy yesterday when Jon Favreau mentioned in an interview that Grogu had been with Luke for a certain amount of time. And I think there was just some confusion in the way he said it. And then he later clarified, basically, it's been 2 years. This is according to his clarification. It's either a few months to 2 years since the Book of Boba Fett happened. And I think that would actually make sense in terms of how big the Children of the Watch are again.
Yes, things have progressed since we've checked in with this section of the galaxy last. You know, like, the Children of the Watch have grown. They were all but wiped out before, and now, I mean, we see almost as many, I think, as in season 1. Or maybe even more. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it feels like more.
Yeah. And then, you know, obviously, like, Grief, his whole thing has been progressing. Navarro's looking very different.
Yeah.
It makes sense. It makes sense. It also, like, yeah, the last time, it feels maybe like... Okay, so a thing at first, before considering everything, that I was like,
Yeah.
Din comes right back to the Children of the Watch after, like, basically last time we saw him,
Right.
he was leaving them, you know?
Right.
So it felt just like, okay, last time we saw Din, he just left, and now he's just, like, right back. It felt
Right.
a little weird, felt a little
Sure.
circular, you know?
Yeah.
It makes sense in what they had to do,
Yes.
because they had to get him back to kind of set up the episode, give some exposition, and get people caught
Yes.
up on Book of Boba Fett again.
Yes.
But with a time gap, it makes sense in universe.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I think there's like room for a really cool, fun novel from the Book of Boba Fett to season 3 of The Mandalorian. Something happened, obviously.
How did Din get the artifacts?
Exactly.
Like that story
Exactly.
will probably be told, I think, maybe in a book or something like that.
Adam Christopher, we're looking at you. So yeah, that I think 2 years feels about right for the time. And then, of course, he's going to have to track down where the Children of the Watch are.
Right.
They're not easy to find. So again, I don't think the timeline really matters that much, but just know we're probably anywhere from 8 to 10 years after A New Hope at this point. So, all right. So back inside the new cave covert, the armor works on a bench and Din enters, watching her. Grogu follows him in. Angrily, the armor reminds him that he removed his helmet willingly and he's not a Mandalorian anymore. Din reminds her that the creed teaches them about redemption. I thought this was fantastic acting from Emily Swallow as the armor, as she, like, just even in her voice performance, the way she's kind of talking to Din, you can hear that edge in her voice of like she's annoyed at him being there.
Right. But she's still kind of taking her role as like spiritual guide seriously, if
Yes.
that makes sense.
Yep.
I mean, there's not a lack of like compassion and understanding in her voice.
It's like she's hurt.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
It's like Din kind of hurt her feelings. Like you didn't follow the way.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, she says that the mines no longer exist due to the fact that it was destroyed when the Empire glassed the planet. However, Din pulls something off his belt and asks if this inscription, if it's not Mandalorian. And Mac, I'd love, again, a book of how he got this artifact. There's a whole story there.
Yeah.
That they could
He
tell.
just said he got it from a traveler. A traveler retrieved it. So what that means
Yeah.
could be a lot of different things.
Right. And yeah, for the first time, the armor finally looks at Din as he sets down what looks like kryptonite on
Pretty
the
much,
table.
yeah.
And embedded into the shard is metal with Mandoa script, which is their language. And the armor comes around to look at it, and she wants to know where it came from. And Din says Jawas, who traded it with a traveler who apparently visited the surface of Mandalore. And again, I'm really interested who that traveler could be. And I wouldn't be shocked if we actually meet that traveler at some point in the season.
Yeah, I've got a couple theories on maybe who it could be.
Well, go ahead and share. We're here.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, it's possible Sabine could have done it. Sabine's kind of a candidate in my mind.
That's
Sabine
a good
Wren
candidate.
is from Rebels. She's Mandalorian. I think
We'll see her
she's
in live action soon.
absolutely. I think she is invested in the future of Mandalore and that kind of thing. So there would be motivation for her to go check the planet out and that kind of thing. Could be like a weird, wacky character like Hondo Anaka. Somebody who
feels right.
just kind of travels around and steals things and sells them and, that kind of thing.
Lor Santeca.
Lor Santeca, absolutely. So Max von Sydow's character from The Force Awakens, we know that he's like an artifact.
Treasure hunter, basically.
Yeah, he's space Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a lot of different people running around that it could be. We'll see. Maybe
we'll see. So
or it could be just a traveler for all
exactly,
of time,
and we'll
that'd be
never
fine
get it.
too.
Yeah, that's fine. To the armor, the relic proves that the entire surface has been glass because, of course, like if you look at it, it looks again like kryptonite.
Yep.
Basically, Din says if someone can get this, the planet isn't poisoned, and if he can prove he's bathed in the living waters in the mines, he will no longer be exiled. The armor kind of thinks it through. She looks back and forth at Grogu, then back at him, and the armor's voice changes slightly as she agrees with this is the way. And so she's like fine with it. Like if you can find it and prove that you've done this, you're back in.
Yeah, I think there's like a mixture of she's incredulous. She doesn't necessarily believe that everything she doesn't think this can actually be accomplished.
Yeah.
But also I think there's maybe a little hope in there too. Like, oh, if this did turn out to be true, there's a way that like Din could kind of rejoin the fold,
Right. Yeah, there does seem to be hope. And I do feel like, Mac, that this scene served two purposes. Number one, to remind us of Din's situation, but also establish what the focus of the season, or at least the first half of the season, is going to be. There was some exposition here, right? Like, again, it works if there has been a long time between the last time we saw them together.
Right. If there hasn't, then like there's a lot of kind of circular plot stuff that just was there to get the story to where we needed it to be. So I think the time, I like the time gap.
I do too.
It makes things sit more comfortably in my head.
I do too. And then we cut to Din's fighter in hyperspace. Din's asleep while Grogu is watching the blue tunnel of hyperspace travel by. And as he is watching, something in the tunnel wall begins to take shape. So if you have watched Star Wars Rebels, you know what this is. Those are Purrgil.
Yes.
And if you don't know, they're giant space whales.
Yes, and they are absolutely in this episode of The Mandalorian for a reason.
Yes, they are.
At the end of Star Wars Rebels, two characters, Ezra Bridger, who's a Jedi, and then Grand Admiral Thrawn, who I don't think we have time to get into everything about Thrawn, but
we know Ahsoka's looking for him.
Yes, and we essentially think, he's going to be kind of the big bad at the end of the Mando-verse, collision of all the shows, if that happens.
Yeah.
He's like the Thanos of the shared universe, if you will.
Yeah.
But they, at the end of Star Wars Rebels, the last time anyone's ever heard anything from either of them, the Purrgil's hyperspace jumped them out into the unknown regions.
Yep.
So
Purrgil can basically jump into hyperspace on their own. Like they're space wells that somehow get into those hyperspace tunnels. And like Max said, they took Thrawn and Ezra somewhere that we don't know.
Right. Yeah. So they're for sure here as a reminder of that. And just
felt
to get
intentional.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was just beautiful and pretty too.
It was, yeah. It was more than just like, oh, this is a really cool thing that Grogu's seeing. Like, this is a cool shout out to Star Wars Rebels. We've seen these before. It's more than just an Easter egg. I think, especially with John and Dave, they like to give you hints of what's to come. And I think this is telling you, if this is not addressed in The Mandalorian, it's going to be addressed in the next show, Ahsoka, which we'll be here to cover scene by scene, just like this.
For sure.
So make sure you're subscribed. Really cool scene. I love that scene. Watch all of Star Wars Rebels. It's so good. Grogu sinks down and pops into Din's arms to go to sleep. I just love that whole little thing right there.
I do logistically wonder how that works. Just like, does he like stand on a little shelf in the circular turret, and then he can just like pop down into the
it's like
the
his
body
rim
of the starfighter?
Yeah, it's like when Grogu needs alone time, he goes into the little bubble, you know.
Yeah, and just like, how does he stand?
I think it's a little seat. I think he's got like a little seat. You know?
All right.
I think I think so. I don't know. So later, the fighter jumps out of hyperspace and approaches Navarro. And when we see the city, it's flourishing. It is really grown. And again, that 2-year time gap would give this time to become this type of city. Yeah.
It reminds me of like it's gorgeous, basically. Like, this environment is one of the... I think I want to live on Navarro, like this era of Navarro, if I'm going to live in the Star Wars galaxy. It seems like just a like archetypical, thriving, Star Wars metropolis.
Yeah, and it's awesome.
Like, it doesn't have the seedy feel of like Mos Eisley and A New Hope. It's not it doesn't have the kind of the dark urban feel of like Coruscant or something.
It's perfect.
It's amazing. It reminds me a lot of like the Dantooine Enclave in the Knights of the Old Republic games.
There it is.
If you've got your Children of the Watch bingo cards out, you can go ahead and mark off KOTOR reference. Probably won't be the last time. We'll see. No. But yeah, I love it. Navarro is looking dope.
Yeah, it's looking awesome. And an automated voice greets Din and declares that Navarro is an independent port and outer rim trade anchor now. And Din says he's there to meet Greef Karga. Later, Din and Grogu walk through the new bustling streets of Navarro, and it looks a lot like Galaxy's Edge if you've been there. The Mon Calamari kind of freaks Grogu out a little bit. We also see a tree full of Kowakian monkey lizards. And again, I think that's to show from the very first episode where we see them roasting on a spittle. Now they're thriving and alive, which is great.
Yeah, it's such a fun little detail. I love it. It's amazing.
Life is good on Navarro right now.
Yeah, and I love seeing aliens again.
Yes.
Andor, for all of its amazing qualities, didn't have quite enough aliens, I don't think.
I agree.
That's one of my complaints about that show.
Yeah, and it was just cool to see like a Mon Calamari just walking around like, that's Star Wars.
Yeah.
There we go.
Maybe season 2 will have a few more aliens.
I hope so. So then they approach a statue commemorating IG-11, and part of the statue is actually some of the remains of IG-11 somehow, even though that thermal detonator was in his chest. For story's sake, it's still there.
Yep.
But then Greef Karga calls out to the Mandalorian, and behind them, when Greef is coming, there's 2 little droids carrying his robes, which I just thought was incredible.
I love it. I mean, it shows you that this is the same old Greef who thinks that his position is a lot further elevated than it actually is, I think, kind of thing.
Yes.
I mean, Greef, he's a great guy, thinks a lot of himself, you know?
He really does.
So yeah, but I mean, this is consistent with his character, and it was just a very fun little background detail.
We all have friends who remind us of Greef, right?
Yeah.
Like, he thinks he's really important. I'm going to play along with him.
Right, because it's more fun that way.
Exactly. So Din greets him, and Greef says he's actually a high magistrate, not just magistrate.
Oh yeah, get it right.
They go to his office where Grogu uses the Force to spin himself around in the chair, which great scene.
So many fun little Grogu one-off shots that are just like, oh, look at Grogu doing something cute in this episode. You know?
Yeah, and Grief lets them know that they're officially a trade spur of the Hydean way. And I want to say that's really important to a theory I'm going to share later. So remember that. The Hydean way. They mentioned that in season 2 in the school when Grogu was dropped off at the school. They talked about all these little things. That's going to come up later. I think they're setting up Skeleton Crew, just to give you a little preview of the theory there.
Cool.
Grief tries to get Din to settle down with his kid, and then he finally learns his name is Grogu, which, by the way, I kind of forgot that Grief didn't even know his name was Grogu.
Right. That was, yeah. I also had the same reaction as Grief the first time I heard the name Grogu, which was just like, all right.
Sure.
Sure. Why not?
That's what you want to call him. I guess so.
Knock yourself out.
Grief wants to show him where he can live as Grogu continues to spin in the background. Din lets Grief know about his new quest and that he's now an apostate. And then Grogu force grabs candy from a dish while Grief says, where you're from, you may be an apostate, but here you'd be landed gentry. And not only will you land gentry on Navarro, but you can land gentry over on our Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/The Mandalorian Watch for over 60 bonus episodes of the show, as well as bonus voicemail hotline episodes in season. And you can get all of that for just $2 a month. And we've had a lot of people asking us, Mac, because, it's the month of Pedro Pascal.
Of course, yeah.
Are we talking about The Last of Us any on the Patreon? And I've got to say, because of our schedule with The Mandalorian, we are not. We wish we could, but we can recommend a great podcast for scene-by-scene breakdowns to help you further digest The Last of Us. So if you're watching The Last of Us on HBO, check out Oyster, Clams, and Cockles, who's crushing a companion podcast for every episode after The Last of Us ends. If you're a Succession fan, they'll be covering Succession's final season in the same fashion. And it's hosted by two guys who have been best friends for over 20 years. They started a Game of Thrones podcast. And in fact, they're the ones who inspired us to do this type of format.
Yeah.
So you can thank them for this podcast as well, because they really helped inspire us. So make sure you check out Oysters, Clams, and Cockles wherever you enjoy our show.
Yeah, if you're just looking to have fun, just hanging out with people, talking about a TV show that is, fantastic, that's a great show for you to check out. Definitely recommend.
Absolutely. So back to the episode. A droid enters the office and tries to tell Grief that pirates have come to see him and they're in the courtyard. And then we cut to a group of pirates trying to enter the school. And now this is important to remember. If you were confused in this scene of why are they trying to get into that school so badly? Well, the school used to be the bar in season 1. And so the droid won't let them in, and Grief confronts the leader known as Vane and tries to get him to go to the office as Din watches. What did you think of this when you first started to see what was going on here, Mac?
I mean, so in the episode, this interaction works, right? It showed the passage of time, that, things are different than they used to be. And that, the attitude on Navarro and Grief's attitude has changed greatly. That pirates are not, so in, pirates aren't welcome and everything. In episode, there's a lot of cool reasons for this exchange. But I think you have a little bit of a theory on something that folks might be kind of trying to point at with this.
Yeah. So with the Purgils, I felt like that might've been set up for Ahsoka a little bit, mm-hmm. right? I think we're getting another setup to another show we might be getting this year or maybe early next year, Skeleton Crew. So we don't know a lot about that show. Of course, we know that Jude Law's in it. We know that it's been described as kind of like Stranger Things in space. So it's got kids. Mm-hmm. We know that the kids are lost and that Jude Law is with them. And there's been a lot of talk and some reports that Jude Law might be their teacher. So here's my theory. If that's the case, I actually said this on our Mandalorian prediction episode where maybe Jude Law is playing Lor Santeca, and maybe that's the case. But if he is playing, and this would still work if he was playing Lor Santeca, maybe. But if he's their teacher, he could be teaching at this school in Navarro. And it could, like, these pirates could be chasing them throughout the unknown regions and stuff in that show.
Yeah. You never know. That's a very interesting thought. We probably won't be able to say one way or another for sure until we see Skeleton Crew.
Yeah, and I'm sure we're going to get more information on that at Star Wars Celebration, which is in April.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It just seemed like, and especially when we see Gorian Shard, is like, yeah, I could see him being the villain of that show.
Yeah, for sure. With kind of, and again, we don't know a ton, but just like what I imagine the tone, he would fit in as an antagonist very well.
It feels very Treasure Planet, which, again, like in my mind, that works for Skeleton Crew really well.
Absolutely.
So
I think of it as like young Indiana Jones, like the beginning of The Last Crusade when he's like a Boy Scout and everything. That's kind of what I imagine for Skeleton Crew.
Oh, that would be so much fun. I'm excited to get more information about that, which, of course, we will be covering on this podcast. So we learned some important information here. Like you said, Greef had to cut a Pirate King Gorian Shard's treasure to build the original saloon. So he has a connection to Gorian Shard. Maybe he was part of that pirate crew at one point. By the name, Gorian Shard, or Pirate King Gorian Shard, is a great name, by the way.
Oh, yeah. It's top tier Star Wars name. It's
really
right
good.
up there with Therm's Scissor Punch, in my opinion.
That one's a good one. Savage Opress. Another classic Star Wars name.
Yep.
Yeah.
Love it.
Greef is doing his best to diffuse the situation. I think he really does a good job of like, okay, let's get away from the school. Let's go to my office. I can get you some drinks. Trying to just diffuse the situation, but Vane isn't having it. He wants to drink in the school.
Like, it's not about the drinks, right? This is just like a power struggle at this point.
Yeah. And then this is where Din finally pipes in, and a good old-fashioned standoff is about to go down.
Oh my goodness. I am so glad that we're like really playing up the Western influences again. I think that's like one of the things that made especially season 1 of The Mandalorian really special is just kind of that modeling off of old Western and cowboy movies. This scene was perfect. Loved awesome. Din as just the quiet, silent gunslinger in the corner that he's just waiting. The first sign of trouble he's drawing.
Yeah.
I love it.
And I kind of love that he was going to let Greef handle it. But then when he realized like, okay, this is escalating, I'm going to let them know I'm on his side.
Right.
So what it's really like, you forget this about Greef, and he did this in season 1. He's quick on the draw. Right? Yeah. Like he's good at what he does, and he shoots the blaster out of Vane's hands. And before the others can get the jump, Din and Greef shoot the rest of the other pirates.
Right.
And Greef lets Vane go to tell Gorian Shard that Navarro is no longer friendly to pirates. And I think that's a huge mistake.
I do too.
Terrible mistake.
You should have just let these people go missing,
Like exactly. And if you didn't want to kill him, just like lock him up. I don't know.
Whatever you do. I guess they're down a marshal at this point, but so like this interaction tells me a lot about Greef.
Yeah.
Like Greef has grown as a character. The Greef from season 1, I think for sure makes deals with pirates and stuff, right?
Yes.
But like now we see that like he's still the same old Greef. He's posturing and kind of thinks highly of himself and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But he cares about Navarro genuinely now. And he's like willing to put it all on the line to stand for something. So I think that's showing great character growth in Greef.
Yeah. I would love to get some background on Greef. Like when he was a younger man, maybe hanging out with Gorian Shard. That's another novel potential there, because I think that would be like really funny, because Greef's like funny but not on purpose,
right?
He believes his own hype.
Yeah, I mean he's like for sure a comedic character, but not because he's a clown or anything.
Exactly,
just because
But I agree. Like he has shown a lot of growth from season 1 to this season, absolutely, and he's kind of taken that spiritual mentor role a little too that Quill had, in the sense of like that fatherly type figure, grandfather type figure Grief has that now.
Yeah. Offering help and,
Yep.
advice where it can, be had and stuff. But I think he's a little less prescriptive than Quill. I think Grief's not going to like go out of his way to
Right.
give Mando instructions and stuff.
Yeah, right. After the confrontation, Grief says he needs a marshal, and Din asks about Kara, and we learn that she was recruited by Special Forces, seemingly the Rangers of the New Republic. So I would imagine she's off doing secret missions and stuff, and maybe we'll get that one day. I don't know, but we'll see.
Yeah, but Grief offers Din the job.
Yes.
And I think this is kind of a common theme we've seen, is that like Din has had multiple chances to settle down and live like a quiet, peaceful life.
Yep.
But he's staying driven and he's still kind of pursuing. He's following the way still.
Yeah.
I think that's an important theme to kind of keep in mind for the Mandalorian.
I did have a thought of like, I wonder if this is how they get Cobb Vanth in the story.
Ooh.
If like he became the Marshal of Navarro, because like you don't really need it on Tatooine now that Boba's in charge.
Yeah, that'd be a great place for Cobb to fit in.
Yeah, I could see that happening. We'll see. So then Din asks about Gideon. And again, that's kind of more exposition, more setup for the audience. That Moff Gideon, what's going on with him? Well, we learned he's been sent to the New Republic War Tribunal, and the Mandalorian like kind of scoffs, like, yeah, like anything's gonna happen there.
Right.
And then Grief goes on to say that he'd make a fine lawman, but Grief doesn't want the New Republic sticking their nose in his independent operation. And after telling him that he can't, Grief wants to know how he can help. Like, okay, you can't do that, but how can I help you? Din points up at the IG-11 statue. He wants to rebuild IG-11 because he needs a droid he can trust to explore Mandalore.
Yeah. And I mean, so at first, when I was first thinking about this, I was like, that seems like a very specific like request. It's like, no, I need this droid. But I recall like, especially season 1 makes a huge deal about Din distrusts droids because of, like they, invaded his home, and that's like kind of what orphaned him and stuff like that during the Clone Wars. And so, I mean, it makes sense that like he's like, I know I've been on missions with this droid. This droid has like literally died for me.
Yeah, right.
And so like I trust it. No other droid will do. And I love that we're bringing that back because I felt like we got away from that characteristic of Din a little bit.
Yep.
So it's cool. It's good to see.
Yeah, like because I had the same reaction. I'm like, why do you need IG-11? Like you can just get a different droid for that. But again, like it goes all the way back to season 1, like you said. I love that.
Right.
That's really, really cool. So they take what was left of IG-11, and later we see Din working on the remains. And when it finally turns back on, IG-11 gives out a distorted Bondsman Guild speech. But then when he sees Grogu, he announces that the asset needs to be terminated. And so it seems like all the work that Quill did on IG-11 has been wiped out. And it's back to its original programming, and it comes after him like the Terminator. Literally, like a scene from the Terminator.
Like the one like right before the hydraulic press scene. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. Din throws Grogu to Grief, and as it crawls towards Grief, the protocol droid knocks the bust of Grief onto IG-11. And then we get a corny dad joke from Din saying, "Now that's using your head." But
I'll go on record, not a fan of this quip. I
doesn't
love,
feel like Din.
No, and Din can be a very funny character, and I like when he is, but I think his like quipping and humor really only works for Din when it's like in spite of himself.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. So yeah, not a huge fan of the quip, but
the thing is, he's a dad now.
Oh, you're right. You're right. I forgot about the dad jokes.
It just comes with the territory. Like me being a new dad as well. Like you just have to do it. You can't help it. You see a scenario where a dad joke must occur. You got to say something, and that's what he did.
Fair enough.
It's like the Creed. Like he has to do it. I don't think he wanted to, but he had to.
It's just impulsive.
Exactly. Yeah.
Compulsive.
Yeah. Grief takes Din to the best droid smiths in the Outer Rim, the Enzelians, or I would call them the Fricks.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, is Babu Frick one of these? Like,
He has to be, right?
I heard Babu a few times, but I don't know if that's just a word in their language or what it is. But
So that's concerning, though, because what happened to the other ones? Poor Babu.
Yeah.
Poor
Oh no.
Babu. So Babu Frick, Rise of Skywalker, probably the best thing about the movie.
If we're being real, yeah.
Like
One of the
incredible
highlights.
character.
One of the highlights.
One of the highlights. We'll say that. So it's really cool, like, to see probably Babu Frick and a team of others working on IG-11. And it makes sense story-wise of like, oh, that's a cool connection to the Rise of Skywalker. I really like that. And inside their little miniature home, they work on IG-11, and they say they can't fix it. And then we get this funny back and forth with Grief, the Fricks, and Din. Basically, the memory circuits can't be fixed, and Din agrees to find a new memory circuit. And there's where we get into our like video game side quest part of The Mandalorian that we had since season 1.
Yep.
So I can assume either next episode or something before we go to Mandalore, or maybe not. I don't know. He's got to find that memory circuit.
Yeah.
That's the next mission.
Yeah. Do you think he might check in with Pelly to see if she's got a lead?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Go to Tatooine.
Yeah, she's got, working relationships with Jawas and stuff. So, I mean, makes sense to me.
Makes sense to me too. So yeah, he's got to find that if he wants to fix IG-11. Then Grogu hugs one of the Anzelians, and it's a great scene of Grogu hugging, and like one of them says, "Bad baby."
Bad baby. And Din's like, I'm sorry. Like, he's so apologetic. Like, he's young. I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly. And then Grogu goes for him again. And I am getting the kind of the stage with my daughter where it's like I could see my daughter doing a very similar thing, and it warmed my heart. Later, Din and Grogu climb into his fighter, and he's off to find a part to fix IG-11, we thought, and he'll be back. And as they leave Navarra behind, Din begins teaching Grogu the components of flying, but as he does, something comes on radar, and it's Vane and the pirates. So we get that immediately in this episode, and I do appreciate that thread is picked up here and not later.
Yep. If everything was set up in this episode, it could have fallen a little flatter, I think.
Yes.
But yeah, they made it a great standalone episode, as well as like taking care of all the exposition, kind of the setup they needed to do.
And that's not to say we won't see the Pirate King again.
Right.
It's just that immediate thing. There's an immediate payoff in this episode, and we get a great little starfighter battle here in the asteroid field that was mentioned earlier in the episode.
Yeah,
I thought it looked great. It was really fun.
I did see. I love to see that Din fights via a starfighter the same way he fights like on the ground, on foot. He hides and goes out of the way and kind of does the Batman thing, operates from the shadows and just like comes out to strike and then hides again.
Well,
doing the same thing starfighter wise.
Well, yeah, he did that in Chapter 6, another Rick Famuyiwa episode on the prison ship.
Yep.
And so, really, really cool. But I also wonder what else might be in that asteroid field, because Grief mentioned it like specifically, and then we see it. Just kind of makes me wonder, is there something else with the asteroid field besides just the pirates? I don't know. Just a thought that popped into my head. And so, like you said, he basically whittles them down to only Vane, and Vane brings them around a huge asteroid where Pirate King Gorian Shard's ship awaits. Now, this design is actually from the old EU, the old expanded universe. It was a type of Star Destroyer in Dark Empire, I believe. It's not as big as one, but that design is there, and it looks really cool. I thought that ship looked awesome.
Yeah, I like it. Kind of has a reminiscence, like the bow looks a lot like the Hammerhead Corvettes, kind of has that kind of vertical spire type thing going on.
Yeah,
looks really cool. Yeah,
very cool design. And then on the bridge, Swamp Thing is actually just Pirate King Gorian Shard.
Yeah, I was expecting him to like reach into the green and like summon some plants to come after Din, because he's just Swamp Thing. Like his entire visual design is just Swamp Thing.
I thought he looked really cool. Like I thought that
Absolutely.
was a really cool, new, unique design. I can't wait for the art book to come out.
Yeah, and I mean it like works for a pirate king too, because he's got the beard stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
He kind of reminded me of like Davy Jones from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. You know, it
all
all
works
works
on purpose.
Visually.
Yeah. Gorian demands that they surrender his ship, and if he does, he's going to let them live. But Din is able to zoom off because remember that starfighter is super fast.
So fast.
So again, I think these pirates, I think they'll show back up in this season, but they could also potentially be setting up Skeleton Crew here. I don't know. They just kind of have that treasure planet vibe.
Yeah,
really
I can
cool.
see it.
Then,
we'll definitely see them again, though. They'll be back.
Yeah, I think so for sure. They're going to be a thorn in Navarro's side. Right.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Then we see Din approaching another planet, one that we haven't actually seen yet, but we've heard about, Kalevala.
Yeah. I love this. So it came up on a recent episode of ours. I can't remember what the context was, but I remember saying, like, I'd love to get more named planets and, like, see them and learn about them that are just in the Mandalorian sector, like in Mandalorian space. So here we are. We're visiting one that we've never been to before.
Yeah, and this is the home planet of the Kryze family.
Yes.
So this is where bo-katan is from. This is where her older sister, who used to rule all of Mandalore, is from.
Duchess Satine. Yep.
And as they break out of the rainy clouds, they see a Mandalorian castle. And Din, that was really cool.
Yeah. I love the architectural style of brutalism. It's like relying on like hard edges and angles and like the use of like raw concrete and stuff. And this castle like seemed like to me a Star Wars brutalism, like
sure.
a brutalist structure.
Yeah.
It looks super cool. It's consistent with like Mandalorian design motifs we've seen before. All around, no notes, 10 out of 10.
It is. Good job on the architecture's part. So Din lands and is greeted by a droid. Inside, Din and Grogu make their way down a large hall. If there's one criticism I would give this episode, it's this scene. I wish we could have fleshed this out a little bit more. Like maybe Din walks through a very empty castle. You really feel the emptiness of it, and maybe you see like a painting of Satine on the wall that's kind of dusted and stuff. I don't know.
Like walking into Beast's castle at the beginning of Beauty and the Beast.
Exactly.
Kind of thing. Things have like gone down. Like
things are not good here.
Yeah. Something has occurred.
Yeah. But as Din and Grogu make their way down a large hall, you can see the Kryze family crest hanging on the walls, and at the end on a throne is bo-katan. And she is not in a good place, Mac.
No, not at all. I was shocked that we were getting both the Armorer and bo-katan and Grief all in this episode. It seemed like, okay, we're just like we're setting up all the different through lines the season is gonna have. We're giving them all the starting point of the first episode, and I think that's great because now they can just weave in and out of the rest of the season however they see fit, you know. So it's a good call, but I definitely agree. Like, could have taken a little more time.
Yeah.
That kind of thing, but yeah, bo-katan.
They did a lot in this episode.
We covered a lot of ground, and it was only 37 minutes with credits. That's wild to me.
I mean, that's why I don't typically like fret over how long the episodes are, because like it just really kind of depends on what they're trying to accomplish, you know.
Right.
And I think this episode did everything it needed to do and more.
Absolutely. It was thoroughly enjoyable.
Absolutely. So before we get into their conversation that they have, did you notice the relief on the wall next to the throne?
I did not. I'll have to catch that on a rewatch.
So it looks like Mandalorians fighting, but I couldn't tell who. It's either other Mandalorians or Jedi.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I wonder what position the like Clan Kryze had in ancient times. You know, like were they like a House Vizsla? Like have they always been kind of like a top power in Mandalorian society? Have they is there anything historically they're associated with doing or accomplishing? Interesting. But like art on the walls could kind of clue us in on that.
So Bo-Katan's sister and father, Adonai Kryze, had like very pacifistic intentions with Mandalore, and so like this relief does not match that. Right. So it's either something Bo-Katan put up or it's something ancient, like you're saying.
Right. That's what got me curious, is because I know that's not consistent with like generally what I associate with Clan Kryze.
Right. Din announces that he's there to join her. And I thought Pedro Pascal did a really good job of playing with his voice here, of like, it feels like he's pushing her a little bit, of like kind of testing the waters of where she's at. But she says there's nothing left to join. And he goes on to say he thought that she wanted to retake Mandalore, but she explains that when she returned without the Darksaber, all of her forces melted away.
Which that is not the position we were expecting Bo-Katan to have going into this season. That's a super refreshing little twist and like subversion of my expectations. I
like it.
Yeah.
Because then you put like Bo-Katan in an even more desperate place of like, what is she gonna do?
Right. This is a character who has been through it from an early age.
Yep.
And it seems like now we meet her at this place of just like kind of resignation.
Yeah, it's like she's given up.
Right. Like she's been trying for decades to kind of like, reunite Mandalore and lead and like accomplish all these things, bring back the old ways, but we find her here. She's without a people to lead.
Yeah, and if you want more on her background, you can check out Mandalorian History 201 episodes that we have on our feed.
Yep.
But yeah, like Din wants to know where the stolen fleet is, right? Like we know from season 2 that they had the Gazanti cruiser, but then also that destroyer at the end. They had Moff Gideon's destroyer.
Yep.
And she says they're making their way through the galaxy as mercenaries. Can you imagine Mandalorians and Imperial warships just traveling the galaxy?
No, it'd be terrifying.
Yeah, that's not good.
We're like getting back to Crusades time.
Yeah.
Which, if you want any information on the Crusades, again, there you go. Mandalorian History 201.
There you go. Another plug there. Yeah, and she wants to know if he still has the Darksaber. And when he confirms that he does, she tells him, well, you lead them.
Yeah.
And she actually says, wave that thing around and they'll do whatever you say.
I think that gives us a lot of insight into how she feels about the Darksaber and that tradition and everything.
So that's really interesting because that's a tradition then that's not just particular to the Children of the Watch. Pretty much all Mandalorians are like, yeah, whoever won that in combat needs to lead us.
Right.
That's interesting.
Yeah, she's frustrated with the way that things have gone.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And Katie Sackhoff, just fantastic
Nails
performance. I also really like her costuming. Like the costume department did a great job. Like I think the wig is really nice. Like
it's much better than the last one.
Yeah. I'd love to see her. Great performance again.
Yeah. So Din starts to push here and he says, so you gave up your designs to retake Mandalore, and angrily Bo responds, your cult gave up on Mandalore long before the Purge. Where were you then? The Children of the Watch and all the factions that came before fractured and shattered our people. Go home. There's nothing left. So to me, Mac, this pretty much confirms Children of the Watch is an offshoot of Death Watch.
Yeah, it is intentionally vague just to keep that kind of intrigue alive, I think. But to me, that definitely indicates that, Children of the Watch is just the next,
iteration,
succession, or the next step on this line of succession from Death Watch. And maybe Death Watch came from somewhere.
Exactly. That's what I was about to say. Like, there could have been an original Watch, and then there's offshoots of that.
Maybe. That would make sense. Just like The Watch. Maybe The Mandalorian Watch. Which was our original show name.
Our OG name, The Mandalorian Watch. There we go. And then now we've become something else. Children of the Watch.
It's amazing. It's like life imitating art,
Wow. Din lets her know of his plans to bathe in the living waters. I'm going to take a bath in there. And she calls him a fool. And she goes on to say, there's nothing magic about the mines of Mandalore. They supplied Beskar ore to our ancestors, and the rest is superstition. That planet has been ravaged, plundered, and poisoned. And then Din basically says, okay, you need to make up your mind about if the curse is real or not.
Right. Like either, yes, it is really cursed and there is like danger and everything, meaning the mines of Mandalore and the legends are real, or there's no danger because there's nothing supernatural about the mines of Mandalore.
Exactly.
Can't have it all.
Yep. It's interesting. Bo-Katan tells him to go ahead and that the mines are beneath the Civic Center.
I thought that was just like, we specified the Civic Center.
Do you know? Okay. Hey, let me finish that before I go back to it. The Civic Center in the city of Sundari, which is the former capital of Mandalore in the Bubble City that we saw in the Clone Wars, we saw destroyed in the Book of Boba Fett in the flashback. Mm-hmm. There was an episode, probably one of the worst episodes of the Clone Wars that I can remember, that had to deal with Mandalore and some of the children of Mandalore, and Ahsoka was involved, called Corruption.
Yes!
And we covered that episode in detail. We had a lot of fun. We had a lot of laughs on that one.
Yeah, that was a running gag on our show for a long time.
Was that in the Civic Center?
I think it may have been, or maybe it was mentioned. We went there at some point in the episode. It'll be interesting to see if like we can see the rubble and remains of like what we saw in the Clone Wars, you know, and they're like really good about the attention to detail of that kind of stuff. So I feel like we'll be able to pick out some like, okay, going back to, you know, watching Sundari at its height during the new Mandalore movement, like these buildings are here and here and here. And then like maybe we'll be able to find them all toppled over and broken up.
Yeah, and again, we have covered every single episode of Mandalorian stuff on the Clone Wars and Rebels. We did a breakdown just like this. Go back and find them in our feed. But yeah, it's really interesting. Maybe we'll see the throne room, like the broken throne room of Sundari, if it survived. That's the one that I want to see the most.
For sure.
A lot of stuff happened in that room.
That's been a important room to the honestly like the course of the Star Wars galaxy.
Yes. Yeah. So, really interesting. Then the way Bo-Katan says goodbye to Din, it really made me go, because like maybe she knows something's down there that will kill him, or maybe she's like, I don't know. There's just the way she said it was like, I don't know if I like the way she said that.
Yeah. I mean, like, she believes that the planet is poisoned and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, she might just think that this is a fool's errand, kind of a suicide mission type thing. But she could know
nefarious.
Something
that there's something down there. There's something. I mean,
we have I think a mythosaur is down there. I do too. I think there's going to be a mythosaur down there, and maybe Din will ride it out of the mines of Mandalore.
So one of our callers in our Mandalorian predictions episode had a fantastic theory that there might be some Mandalorians still down there surviving.
The Mandalorians. Oh, yeah.
Who maybe like are following an even more ancient way down there.
Gone kind of feral.
Yeah. And there's some suggestion when you start thinking back to the trailer, especially the last part of the trailer. It looks like they might be on Mandalore, and there's that thing that jumps down. I don't know. That Grogu pushes out. Maybe that's not a creature. Maybe it's a Mandalorian wearing like skin stuff to survive on the surface. I don't know.
Or it could be that like all the radiation has caused mutations and like all that kind of stuff.
Mutated Mandalorians?
Yeah, there's a whole line of speculation we could go down in that regard. But
I don't. So yeah. There's a lot that's coming. Super exciting. That's the end of the episode. Mac, where do you think we're going from here? Like, do you think that he's going straight to Mandalore, or has he got to get that memory circuit first?
Okay, so we know that Rick has directed this episode and is directing 7 and 8, right? Yes. I think we're not going to get to the Mines of Mandalore until maybe chapter 6 of this season. There's somewhere in there. I
know
think
who's
the Minds of
directing that one?
Mandalore. Do what?
You know who's directing that one?
That's Bryce Dallas Howard, right?
It is.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
I
could see
think
that.
maybe like kind of the last 3-episode arc or 2-episode arc is going to be the Minds of Mandalore. I think we'll have kind of side quest to find IG-11's memory thing that could lead to some other shenanigans, kind of mid-season.
More pirate stuff, the Pirate King thing they got to take care of too.
Maybe Din runs into some of those Mandalorians that are just out kind of being mercenaries in the galaxy.
I would say yes, that's highly likely.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a good probability of that. But I think we're gonna end the season with the Minds of Mandalore. I think that's what the end game for the season is.
Interesting. We'll see. I don't know. I mean, I could also see them wrapping that up earlier and then something happening with that, because you've also got to like consider at some point Moff Gideon's got to enter the story with the Empire.
That's true.
And so there's going to be a lot there too. So I don't know.
And I mean, what I think is coming is going to change every episode we see.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So like what we do know is this, those who got invited to the premiere in Lucasfilm, we would love to be invited one day. Just FYI. Those who got invited to the premiere, they got to watch episode 1 and 2. And without spoilers or anything, a lot of people are saying episode 2 is like even better than episode 1. Like it's like incredible. So I'm really looking forward to next week. It's just a week away, Mac.
Right, I know. We'll be back, right on this feed, doing this again next week and for the next 6 weeks after that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so excited. This is a fantastic start to the season. I mean, it was a ton of like exposition and setup and stuff, but they did it in a way that kept me interested and entertained the whole time. It's just great to be kind of back in this mood of Star Wars, if that makes it's just so fun and makes me think about what could possibly be around the corner more than anything else.
Absolutely. And we would love to hear what you guys thought about the episode. We want to hear any wild, maybe irresponsible speculation that you have on the episode. So call into our voicemail hotline. That's 205-259-6675. Again, 205-259-6675. And your voicemail might make it onto the show. And then, of course, we're going to be doing a bonus voicemail episode over on the Patreon as well. So we're super excited about that. And another way that you got, if you can't support us on the Patreon, another big way you could help us out is by rating and reviewing us over on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and especially on Apple Podcasts, because that will really help us out. So we're like maybe 50 away from 1,800 reviews. I want to put a challenge out to the listeners. Can we get to 1,800 before episode 2?
That'd be amazing. That'd be awesome.
That would be incredible.
Yeah, your reviews are honestly the number one thing you can do to support us, and it just gets more people aware of the show, gets more people into the conversations we're having. So I mean, it's a win-win, I think.
And then of course tell all your friends and family about us.
Right,
we'd love that too.
Yep. And look at the YouTube channel too.
Yes.
We're going to be doing some stuff. The podcasts are going to be releasing in video form over there a little bit later. Each time, they're not going to be right when the audio podcast comes out. But if you prefer to consume stuff later in a video format, check out YouTube. We're also doing some other special little projects and stuff over there too. So cool stuff. Check it out.
Yeah, and like if you've already listened, just go put the YouTube on. Just let it play,
just
have it run on the background.
Maybe if you just wanted to, start some of our playlists with autoplay on, it could be cool.
Or you want to just see our faces?
Yeah, I mean,
hi,
what's up? Here we are.
This is our face. So you can do that and more. You guys are the best. This was an incredible first episode. I've been up since 4 a.m.
Yeah, I've been up since 5.
So it is Mandalorian season when you start feeling that tiredness in the middle of the day. So
absolutely.
But it is so worth it, and we are so glad to be back. We love you guys. This is so much fun. I can't wait to do this each and every week. This is going to be incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So stay tuned for more Mandalorian coverage just around the corner. Check out our voicemail episodes, this week too. Those kind of come out in between the breakdowns and stuff. So check all that out, and we'll see you again real soon. But until then, keep the watch.